This video was brought to you by Brilliant. On Monday, Apple unveiled the new iPhone 16, the latest version of its flagship product. After a tough few years, Apple are hoping that a host of new generative AI features, including an enhanced Siri, photo editing features, writing aids, and free access to ChatGPT, will be enough to re-establish the iPhone's dominance in the smartphone market, and potentially convince old iPhone users that this version is worth upgrading to. So in this video, we're going to take another look at the iPhone's recent decline, and whether the 16 can turn things around. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So before we get into what was actually said at Apple's launch event, let's start by outlining the iPhone's current woes. Well, the iPhone is still the world's best-selling phone, not to mention by far and away the most profitable. iPhone sales have declined markedly in the last year or so. In the first quarter of 2024, for instance, Apple shipped just over 50 million iPhones, a 10% decline year on year, and nearly 2 million less than analysts expected. This is broadly for two reasons. The first is that Apple and the iPhone are losing market share in China. For the past few years, China has accounted for something like 20% of all iPhone sales. But in the first 2 months of 2024, sales were down nearly 40% year on year. Something similar has also happened in other industries too, where Western companies, even those with a long-standing presence in China, have struggled to compete with their Chinese counterparts, whether that's in smartphones, electric vehicles, or fashion. In fact, we've covered this at length in other videos, which are linked in the description. Western companies also haven't been helped by the escalating trade war between China and the West that's encouraged some economic nationalist sentiment among Chinese consumers, who are increasingly likely to seek out homegrown alternatives to Western products. Anyway, Apple responded to these declines with some drastic price cuts, which at least temporarily boosted sales, but this isn't really a long-term strategy. The second problem for the iPhone is that iPhone users just aren't as likely to upgrade or replace their iPhone as they used to be. Now, this is down to a variety of things, including the cost of living crisis and the fact that iPhones today are just more durable than they used to be. For context, from the iPhone 7 onwards, iPhones have been water and dust resistant, with the iPhone 11 and its successors able to withstand a maximum depth of 6 meters for up to 30 minutes. This is obviously, a good thing for consumers, but it does mean fewer sales. However, it's probably mostly because people just aren't as desperate to have the newest iPhone as they used to be. New iPhone models aren't generally that different from the previous models. Back in the day, up until arguably the iPhone X, every iPhone included some groundbreaking new technology that felt like a leap forward from the previous iteration. This is no longer the case though. The main change for the iPhone 15, for instance, is that it had a USB-C charger, which it should be said was forced on Apple by the EU, as well as the removal of the mute button. Now, all of this has been especially troubling for Apple because the iPhone has provided the foundations for Apple's meteoric rise and is still by far and away their best-selling item. Understandably then, Apple is hoping that the new iPhone 16 will be the one that convinces all of these old iPhone users to upgrade. And they're hoping to achieve this in part because the new hardware upgrades are more noticeable than in previous generations. The basic version of the 16 has 2 new buttons. The so-called Action button, which was on last year's 15 Pro and lies at the side of the phone above the volume buttons, replacing the mute switch, and a new camera control button, which lies on the other side and acts sort of like a trackpad. The Action button is basically just another way of accessing shortcuts, while the camera control button is to help you do a whole load of, yep, you guessed it, camera-related stuff, especially in landscape mode. However, the main reason that Apple is hoping that this will be the iPhone that current users upgrade to is because it's supposed to be an AI iPhone, or at least that's how Apple are marketing it. During the iPhone segment of the launch event on Monday, basically half of the time was spent on the new hardware of the 16, and the remaining half was spent on Apple's new AI features in iOS 18, under the umbrella of Apple Intelligence. This includes a revamped Siri voice assistant, photo editing features powered by its own AI models, as well as a partnership with OpenAI that gives users free access to ChatGPT. Apple Intelligence was announced by Tim Cook back in June and helped to fuel a 20% rise in its stock. By juxtaposing the 16 with Apple Intelligence, Apple was clearly trying to sell the 16 as the AI iPhone. In their press release, Apple made this link directly, claiming in the first sentence that the iPhone 16 is, quote, built for Apple Intelligence with the all-new A18 chip, and that it marks the beginning of a new era for the iPhone, with Apple Intelligence delivering powerful, personal, and private experiences to our users. And to be fair, this isn't a bad strategy in principle. Minor hardware changes clearly haven't been enough to convince iPhone users to upgrade in the past, and AI might well be a sufficiently exciting technology to do this. However, a couple of caveats are in order. Firstly, while it's true that the new A18 chip is better equipped to handle the computational demands of AI than the previous chips, some Apple Intelligence features will be available on phones that can handle the upcoming iOS 18 update. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, when the 16 goes on sale on September 20th, it won't actually have these Apple Intelligence features installed on it. Yep, you heard that right. At least to begin with, the AI iPhone won't actually have any AI. And this is all part of a longer running trend. Apple's AI features have been reliably delayed, and its first generative AI features, such as the integration of ChatGPT and the AI-generated emoji, are only due to arrive later this year, while many of the more expansive features aren't due until the first half of 2025. The fact that the new iPhone won't actually come with these new features that are supposed to define it might well take some of the enthusiasm out of the 16's release, and it's one of the big reasons that the market's reaction to Monday's launch has been relatively muted. Thirdly, a lot of these AI features won't actually be available worldwide either. Many language or speech-related features will only be available in English to begin with availability for some other languages coming out later next year. And some features have been temporarily delayed in Europe, with Apple blaming uncertainties coming from Brussels' new competition rules. This obviously limits the commercial appeal of these new features, and could mean that Apple Intelligence won't do all that much to remedy Apple's aforementioned China woes. Ultimately, whether or not the iPhone 16 can rejuvenate Apple's flagship product apparently depends on two questions. Firstly, whether Apple can convince users that this is the AI iPhone, the one worth upgrading to, even though it doesn't actually come with the much-touted Apple Intelligence features. Secondly, whether they can convince users that Apple Intelligence is actually even worth shelling out hundreds of dollars for, and a lot of this depends on the wider trajectory of AI. If ChatGPT, for instance, gets significantly better, then the iPhone can ride its success. But if its abilities stagnate and AI ends up being a cool but essentially gimmicky technology, then Apple's new pitch could well fall flat. With issues like these, it's often hard to come to the right conclusions. So if you want to improve your decision making, you'll want to check out Brilliant. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. For instance, there's the Scientific Thinking course, which takes you on an interactive tour of our physical world. You'll engage with key scientific principles and theories, from simple machines like gears and pulleys to Einstein's special theory of relativity. It's not just a bunch of lectures either. You'll learn by doing, with hands-on lessons that will have you comparing circuits to understand voltage and current, playing snooker to learn the rules of collision, planning your itinerary for an intergalactic music festival on a space-time diagram, and more. That way, you'll build your natural intuition while gaining deep knowledge of scientific principles. Find out more and try everything Brilliant has to offer for a full 30 days by visiting brilliant.org/TLDR or by clicking the link in the description. That way, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks for your support, and thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring this video.